Good evening, everybody. Can I grab everybody's attention? I think a few more people are grabbing their seats, so grab your seats if you all can. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Mark Bassir. I'm the Judy and Leonard Lauder Director here at the Portland Museum of Art, and on behalf of the staff of the museum and the board, welcome. We're so excited to have the opening of a great exhibition, As We Are. I really do love the title, As We Are. It kind of talks about our moment that we're in. It's kind of broad-based, and it's kind of catchy, too. So we work very hard on titles. They're not easy to do, but I really like the title of this particular exhibition, As We Are. I would first like to acknowledge that we're convening tonight's celebration in the land of the dawn, a region encompassing present-day Maine and the unceded homelands of the Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, Mi'kmaq, and Abenaki nations. Together, these nations represent the Wabanaki Confederacy. They stewarded these lands and waters for thousands of years before the establishment of national borders and state lines, and continue to do so today. If you have a chance and you haven't already visited our wonderful Passages exhibition upstairs, please do, as it's part of the Portland Public School Wabanaki curriculum. As We Are, as I said, such a great title. This is a fresh snapshot of contemporary art presented through the lens of 14 up-and-coming artists with ties to Maine. It's really working across a wide range of media. The work is exploring shared concerns, including climate resilience, placemaking, and what it means to belong. I'd like to take this opportunity to do a special thanks to the sponsors. Many of you were on the board just before, including the Thon family and endowment, but in particular a thank to Bath Savings Institution. It's really important and not always easy to get corporate support for contemporary art. So I want to do a big thank you to Bath Savings. Also a grant from the Mimi Fund of the Maine Community Foundation and media sponsors of Maine Public and the Portland Press Herald. And most of all, I want to thank you, our members. We have one of the strongest memberships in the country, and we do what we do for you, with you, and we are just so proud that we have such a strong membership, and we're here tonight because of your support for the Portland Museum of Art. Thank you. Art for All is your museum's mission. And we're one of the first museums that has a mission that's really based on a set of values and not necessarily on a set of tasks. And those values are trust, equity, sustainability, service, and courage. These are our aspirations that we need to work on every day to earn your trust and also to be able to speak truth to power. So in many ways, I don't wonder actually, but people say, well, what is Art for All? So I've been starting to think about like, what is Art for All to me and what I think Art for All is for our organization and for our community. And to me, it's 47% free admission. It's a diverse art collection on display. It's a robust intergenerational participation. It's the Passages exhibition. It's the Jeremy Frey exhibition. It's preserving the Homer Studio for the public. It's our sustainability issues around BIZO, investing in solar farms, and the Title Shift Award. It's also the PMA board, and it's also the PMA staff. And tonight in particular, it's the exhibition, We Are Here. One of the great connections of this exhibition, I think, is thinking about the great ecology of the art scene in Maine today. One of the connectors in this show, there are so many, and talking with so many of the artists last night, also how they're connected, the ways in which they're connected. One of the key ones we're going to learn maybe a little bit about tonight, or I'll at least share with you, is the vibrant art residency program in this state. We have one of the most vibrant art residency programs. And just naming a few, Monson, Skowhegan, Mark, Indigo Arts Alliance, Hugh and Oaks, there are so many others. This is a place that takes care of artists. And one of the reasons the contemporary art scene is so strong here is because we are a place where artists feel like they belong. And it's also important because if you think of the history of art in Maine, which is a big part of our story, that story is only as strong as the current crop of living great artists. We want the future to be just as strong as the past, and I really do feel that this moment that we're in, this show and some of the work you're seeing around the state right now is as strong as it's ever been. And this exhibition, I think, is a testament to that excellent ecology that we're seeing throughout the state. So when you go upstairs, you're going to love it, and you're going to hear a lot from Devon and Sayantan. And I probably should turn it over to them very soon. So the other key part, sorry, I forgot that line. The other key part to the ecology is curators, and curators are crucial to this ecology. And so Sayantan Mukhopadhyay, who is our contemporary and modern curator at this exhibition, Sayantan over the past 18 months has traveled across the United States conducting studio visits, Zoom calls, community conversations, and brought this show to life. Sayantan joined us from Los Angeles in 2023 after completing his PhD in art history at UCLA. Prior to graduate school, Sayantan worked in education, publishing, and the visual arts in New York, Mumbai, Shanghai, and New Delhi. His current research interests include the politics of friendship, speculative futures. Sayantan, I'm still trying to figure out the speculative futures. I love that theme of what we could think about, what the future could look like. Nobody more than artists have a vision of what it could like, because they're not held back by so many of the things that most of us are, sadly, in our everyday lives. And also another key theme is thinking about queer desire in a global framework. We also are really fortunate tonight that Sayantan's going to have a chance to talk with Devon Zimmerman, who's the curator of modern and contemporary art at the Ogunquit Museum of Art. His research explores transatlantic networks in modernism. He has held positions at MoMA, the Met, and the Cooper Hewitt, and curated exhibitions like Deconstructing Power, W.E. Du Bois at the 1900s World Fair, and Ever Baldwin Down the Line. Zimmerman holds an MA from NYU's Institute of Fine Arts and a PhD from the University of Maryland, College Park. I'd like to welcome to the stage Sayantan and Devon.
Welcome everyone, and welcome Devon. Thank you so much for doing this with me.
Thank you so much.
I'd also like to start off by saying welcome to all the incredible artists. All 14 of you, I think, are here tonight, and you'll get to experience their work. Thank you, guys. You are all so amazing, and I'm so excited to share your work with everyone upstairs. So I hope if you haven't had the chance to do so, to please, after this talk, go upstairs and see the exhibition. So today, what I really like to do is that normally the organizing curator of an exhibition at the PMA will give a lecture at the opening of an exhibition, and I didn't quite like the didacticism that kind of connotes, because I'm no expert in contemporary art in Maine. As Mark mentioned, I moved here 18 months ago, and it has been just an incredible learning experience to get to know a little bit about the arts ecology and infrastructure here. I'm humbled by it, and I am really in awe of the trust that all of the 14 artists have put in me to be able to bring their work to light at the PMA. I thought a better strategy would be to chat with an incredible thought partner. Devon is the curator at the Ogunquit Museum of American Art, just down the way from us, the first museum that you hit as you enter Maine from the south. And Devon has been trailblazing an incredible program there. And so I thought we could bring some of the conversations that we have at openings, at dinners, over wine, to the stage here and talk a little bit about the contemporary scene here in the state and our experiences as being relative newcomers to the scene. Yeah.
I thought I was invited because I also have a 310 area code on my fellow Californian.
Yeah, Devon and I both share LA as a background, which I love. Actually, I don't know when you first got to Maine.
I arrived in Maine April of 2022, so I am now only still very new. I consider myself still from away. Yeah. I have not been embedded long enough.
So I'd really like to start talking about that that kind of moment of arrival, because I know what that was like for me. This project kind of was put on my plate very early. It was really an amazing opportunity to get to learn about the kind of the world here. What was that kind of process of integration like for you? What was that kind of early experience like?
I mean, I think I was struck. And in conversations that I've had, it's what strikes everyone about the arts in this state is the ecosystem in the state of Maine is utterly unique.
Robust.
It is robust, but it's also supportive. It is the people that you've brought together in this exhibition who are not just artists, but they play active roles in supporting each other, in creating spaces for each other, in advocating and showing each other's work or collaborating to promote each other. And that is not just among those on view right now. It is something that is in the zeitgeist of the state that is, again, very strange. It's in the best possible way. It is its own unique thing that I haven't quite encountered. And I have these constant conversations with colleagues of, what's it like in the arts in Maine? And I'm like, it's incredible.
I mean, coming from a place like New York or LA, it's like pretty cutthroat. And here I've spent time in studios, and artists will be telling me about their friends, and it'll be like 15, 20 minutes about telling me about who they're obsessing over down the street. I'm like, but back to you. They're so excited about supporting others. That kind of that spirit of generosity also really struck me. I was in a lot of studio visits in preparation for the show, and it was always like, have you been to see this person? Have you been to see this other person? And that it's just it's again, there's like really a sense of community. I was wondering if we could chat a little bit though about the kind of I guess it's like the elephant in the room. Like we talk about this a lot, the category of Maine art, and this gets tossed around a lot. I think with institutional curators, what does that category do? What does it mean? What's at stake? What does it mean? I was really curious to know what you think about. I know we've talked about this before behind the scenes. But
yes, yeah. I think I have over 1 or 2 glasses of wine gone down long rabbit holes about my conflicting relationships with this category of the Maine artists, kind of Maine art specifically, because it constantly circulates around this duality that is both problematic but also productive, in the sense that this category kind of creates a space for a focused amount of attention to be created. But I think that there is, and this is something I've struggled with as I think about programming, and I think about artists, and I think about Maine's history, and I think about just Maine as a concept in the state, and the borders that are kind of drawn for it in their ways and its histories and in that kind of definition, is it summons these ideas and it brackets and closes off at times as much as it sort of reinforces. So what is Maine art? I mean, and that's why I constantly try to ignore that category while acknowledging its histories and turn more towards the people and individuals who are Maine artists, or at least artists who have some sort of relationship to Maine. Because, where are we now? Are we, it comes to the Passages exhibition, which is, the world has always been entangled. There has never been a kind of local community that has not, in even its most passive ways, been, involved or intertwined with global markets, global networks, ideas, in the entirety of modernity. And so this web that stretches out has to be part of it. And I constantly try to think of these ideas of simultaneity or entanglement, because they're resonant with what is going on and how people live their lives here.
One of the most interesting things that I learned that also through our programming here at the PMA that we've been focusing on is, Maine's, speaking of entanglements, the history of Maine's connection with the Caribbean, which I had no idea about before I moved here. And the fact that Maine was, an important port for sugar, coming from the West Indies, and that was a way in which Maine kind of insidiously had ties to practices of enslavement, even as a free state in the North. And so thinking about, Maine existing in an imaginary as being kind of beautiful, bucolic, isolated. It's never really isolated, right? We're always networked. And so that's been fascinating. Yeah, I grapple with this a lot. I didn't my background, I wrote my doctoral dissertation on contemporary art in India. I didn't. I joke that I've retooled as an Americanist now. You have to a little bit, and I take that as a kind of exciting prospect about kind of applying the skills of that you learn in graduate school and taking it to a kind of different world. But there are so many ways in which kind of worlds spill and ideas stretch, and it's amazing to see the kind of flexibility and the similarities. But it's been really interesting to think about the sense of identity here, the sense of kind of, it seems it's so different, so particular. And it is true, it's something that I struggle with in the work. It's like you want to acknowledge it, but there's also a kind of a problematic history there. I think a lot about the work of a theorist, a queer theorist, Gayatri Gopinath, and she kind of talks about the region as being a challenge to the hegemony of the nation state. I love that. I love that we can turn to this category of Maine as a way to subvert these dominant tropes in American art, and that usually means New York, like New York is synecdoche for American art. I don't know if I use the word synecdoche right. That's always a tricky one. But that the category of Maine art can offer respite from the kind of the New York, the dominance of the New York world. I don't know if you experience that in, like, I know for both our roles, we travel to New York quite a bit. Do you see it as being, what's the kind of relationship there for you?
Yeah, I think it comes to different entry points of what it is in this strange and challenging and problematic and particularly exhausting moment of trying to define and identify yourself in an American context. Yeah. And I think, if you're working in New York or you're working in Los Angeles or you're a contemporary artist in Chicago or Dallas, those entry points, and this is coming out of conversations too, particularly with how social media is flattening our spaces. There is even this kind of cultural assimilation that, because of everything collapsing into the national discourse, is shaping the way the communities are identifying themselves, that these regional identifying markers are kind of fading to a certain national identity, discourse, and politics. And so, there are these entry points, though, that even in this kind of flattening, one could say, of unpacking and inflecting, your views, your participation in this project of inevitably American art, or even just contending with notions of Americanness, which is as complicated as it can be.
I realize I've actually never asked you what you did your doctoral research on. You're trained as an Americanist, right?
Oh no, no! I am a fellow traveler. I wrote on interwar Dutch interior design, and then briefly was in kind of a modern and contemporary art world before then segueing into design and then landing in the world of American modern and contemporary art. Yeah. As one does. That is the path. The
flexibility of our,
exactly.
It's amazing. Well, that's great. I feel less alone all of a sudden. Yeah, that's great. So that's fascinating. And you, the institution that you work at, Ogunquit, the Ogunquit Museum is dedicated to American art. It does have these national parameters. Right?
Yeah, so we are, I think technically, the only American art museum dedicated. It is in our kind of charter that we are kind of restricted to collecting only American artists. Now we get to sort of expand what that means and reflect on that, and curiously enough, some of our earliest charters think not quite hemispherically, but at least continentally, so North American as being American, and then kind of growing that out. But it does lead to a different way, at least I've tried to think about, both modern art but also contemporary art in the state, and think of it constantly through this national lens, and struggle with this notion, particularly because of its history and resonance, of also the problematic nature of regionalism. This kind of terminology in way that a lot of, like, one could think of Marston Hartley was being framed, or others at the end of the 20th century, kind of in this Cold War moment where post-Cold War moment, as this kind of attempt to push against globalization came into this kind of inflection into a regionalist aesthetic and like valuing that for their kind of regional locale rather than understanding someone like Hartley as a world traveler. And so it's an interesting kind of set of dynamics as we try to program and think about, you know, conversations, stories, because, you know, by its very nature, a museum is this kind of device for telling stories, both visual and historical, about, you know, what it is to, you know, both be an American art museum and by proxy what it is to be an American, which are fun questions at the moment.
Yeah, I love what you said about museums being kind of, you know, repositories for these narratives. I'm thinking about, I've been getting asked a lot, like, when does the narrative emerge for a show like As We Are? Upstairs, people were asking me, like, when, and for me, it's art-led, usually. They come, you know, and I'm curious, like, are there, I see some dominant narratives emerging among artists today here in Maine. Are there some for you that have stood out in terms of kind of connective tissue, that there seems to be a kind of surge or a trend among artists locally that, you know, seems to be of particular interest?
Yes, well, I mean, I think many of them are captured upstairs. You know, to be fully, you know, candid, I think that there is, you know, a kind of repositioning into what our relationship with Maine's ecology is, and not just through an eco-critical lens or, you know, one that is kind of inflecting environmentalism through narratives of just loss, but actually joy and celebration and the sensuality of the natural world that makes it kind of something that is worth saving. I feel like witnessing a very affirmational approach to the world in which we live is something that is, you know, evident here, and it's one of the unique things about the space of Maine, that it gives space for these kinds of relationships with the natural world, but also kind of, again, with, you know, interiors, families, the way that you're living, both whether it's your immediate family or the families that you're creating, and finding that affirmation in that sense of community as well, that, you know, is vibrant and incredible. I think the sort of flourishing of queer investigations into kind of art, Maine, its history, particularly for a state and at least a tradition within this area that has such long ties to queer art history, just coming from Ogunquit.
Marston Hartley, yeah.
Marston Hartley, but, you know, like Hamilton Easter Field, which is, you know, a project I'm deeply excited to hopefully dive into, who was one of the founders. Ogunquit, for anyone who hasn't kind of traveled down south, and I'll do my little museum pitch for just a second, so if you bear with me, was founded at the turn of the century with two kind of art schools, one for summer students living in Boston, the other one for students coming up from Brooklyn, that a Brooklynite named Hamilton Easter Field founded. And, you know, he was a queer man, and he was the one who brought Hartley up and Springhorn up, and O'Keeffe was just down the road. Cy Twombly was in Ogunquit in 1948, and then, you know, you carry on through to the post-war years, you know, Robert Indiana to the present, and, like, there's so many figures in the state, and there's that tradition that, you know, hasn't been explored, both in a historical sense to the level that it could be, but then to also see artists, you know, forging their own paths and kind of building off those narratives are profound.
Those inheritances, right, that, you know, are kind of there. Whenever as I've been walking through As We Are, I've been thinking, like, there is such a sense of rootedness, but also an opening out, right? The discourse is kind of being expanded. The kinship element has been really interesting. It's part of something, I noticed this in a lot of global contexts, that since the pandemic maybe, or even maybe before, there's really been a turn to the kind of affective orders that sustain us. So the families that you create, or the families that you're born into, and that was such a theme, I think, being in artist studios, learning that that's something that nourishment, where do we get that nourishment from? That's something that everyone is kind of contemplating, thinking about. I do think that in this kind of pandemic, post-pandemic world, where so many of us had to kind of be isolated thinking about what ties are important to us. It really seems to be at the top of people's minds. And it's, even when it's not overtly there, there seems to be a subtext of those threads that kind of join us. It was very powerful to see, sometimes these understandings or notions of community are much more expansive than the ones that we've typically thought of. And yeah, so that was always, it's affirming, right, to see that in so much of the contemporary work coming out of the state, yeah.
Yeah, it was really incredible. I mean, I don't know how you all feel, but the world is a horribly exhausting and cynical place at the moment. It is disparaging in what keeps me kind of most both concerned but interested in, a place for art to exist. Not that I'm speaking towards something that is like everything needs to be happy, but that there are approaches that I think, especially at this moment, are both filled with praxis and agency, but also kind of subversive in the way that finding these affirmational spaces that are frequently at least imbued with some sort of sense of joy or some kind of type of rethinking, is so incredibly striking. It's why the exhibition is so incredibly striking.
Thank you, Devon. So the artists are I immediately think of Rachel's work.
Yes.
Rachel Adams' quilts, which are upstairs, one of the first things that you see. Her quilts, I immediately think of the quilts themselves as being warming. They're something that you're not supposed to be wrapped in them. They're works of art, but they're so inviting. And she's transposed these pictures of her own family life. These images of her, they're so moving. Like somebody said, I was like moved to tears when I saw them yesterday. It's like her holding her daughter, her daughter's playing. Particularly beautiful one it's her mom eating cherry Yoplait with her daughter, this intergenerational kind of scene. And it's so life-affirming, both in medium and in this kind of figurative subject matter. You see it with other artists too. Right next to Rachel's work is Jenny's work, Jenny Ibsen, beautiful ceramic sculptures, trophies. You see one being rotated here, number 1 bun, which I think is so cheeky and very, very cute, I know Jenny's kind of thinking about food as something that unites us. It's something, again, very literally derives sustenance from, nourishment from, but it's also something that we share in together. I could go on and hopefully talk about most artists in the time that we have left today, but there's a kind of joy that I see in so much of the work.
I think you're drawing to the materiality of the things on view as well. And like, again, one of, I think, the joys I found walking through the exhibition is both, not just the range of artists, but the range of media that's on view. And I think, a lot of the work up there is thinking through this agency of materiality. Whether it's both the material of the quilt, but also its history in this process of quilt making, and the familial traditions and histories of passing down quilts in that tangible way, or even just thinking of like the way that Anna is working with kind of building out and thinking through spaces and gardens and how those things are being architecturally constructed, or Alana's way of playing with the grid and finding how once the abstract kind of thought of the grid is brought into a matter, a materiality, that grid quickly begins to dissolve into something that is much more organic because it sort of is defiled by its materiality. Or Brian's work as well, which I really feel like the warnings not to touch the works of art were tested even by me. I know I'm not supposed to, and neither are you, but like I was a good viewer. I was a good viewer. I did not touch anything.
Do not touch it, though, but you will want to. I will get into a lot of trouble with our registrars if you touch it. But
I won't.
It's tough. It's actually, I was wondering if you have this too. It's that moment of the work arriving in the museum, because I will have seen that in the studio, and oftentimes artists are just, like hacking at it with a saw, or it's just an object, and they'll be like, touch it, when you're in the studio, and then it comes as a finished object to the museum, and it's now there's the aura has been placed on it, and so that's always hard for me, as it involves this kind of unspoken shift in your attitude towards the erratic work of art. Yeah,
it's an important reason why to do studio visits, is because you can pet the art.
Yeah. Once again, not in a museum.
Not in a museum.
Yeah.
Find your local artist, do a studio visit, pet their art, and then buy something.
I'd love to talk to you about studio visits. I think it's a huge part of our job.
Yeah.
And we spend a lot of our time in artist studios. I'm curious to know how do you choose which ones to do? How often do you do them? What's your kind of best practice around studio visits?
I mean, I wish I was doing more of them. It's one of those difficult things, particularly, as I'm sure you know, curators, and it may come as a surprise, but the arts tend to be underfunded, so you tend to find yourself more in the other duties as assigned than you do typically in your own job description. So I try to do them more. I find them as incredibly humbling. I am typically not there unless it's a second visit, or unless it's something specifically asked for to be a critical voice. Right. I try to listen. I try not to get too overly excited, because I'm easily excited. I don't know if that's true, but it's such a personal space, and a personal and deeply intimate thing, that I'm always kind of grateful to be invited into someone's studio, because it's like being invited into their home and into their mind, particularly at different stages. I'm no artist, but I think of trying to show someone an early draft of a manuscript or something you're writing. I mean, it's an incredibly vulnerable thing, especially if work is in progress, and you're like, oh, well, how do you think about this and what? So I want to do more. I try to do more, because we live in a world, there's the benefit and doubt, and I don't know if I want to bring up what your relationship to Instagram is, or other sort of social media sites in which you experience or encounter works of art, because it's a really useful device, particularly if you're not able to travel as much or see work, but it is, it's something that I kind of take very seriously, going to an artist studio, in a humbling way.
Yeah, the being in a studio visit, it's a very, but vulnerable for both parties, right? Yeah, and there's a trust, I think, that gets built in that process. I have to thank all the artists in the show for being such wonderful people to do studio visits with. I always wonder, artists always have seltzer. Like, they're always ready with seltzer. There's like a polar seltzer at every artist studio. I'm always very grateful for it, but it's like a continuous thing. I get offered like a bubbly water before I get offered flat water, but I've noticed this. But it's always, and I learn so much about, I think, as in our training as scholars, or academics rather, you get so distanced from the material of it, and so I'm in there and I really want to know about like the alchemical process that's taking place when you're applying a certain kind of paint onto canvas. I mean, Tessa's studio, she was telling me about how she does her batik dyes. I'm fascinated. Like, I'm not. If you're not looking for it, you might just think, oh, there's something beautiful about the way the colors are sitting. But then you go to the studio, you learn, oh, there's this incredible kind of process that goes into dyeing the canvas and painting on top of it. So I'm always really excited to learn about, material when I go in there. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you feel this way, but I have been, because we're so constantly inundated with images. I mean, image after image, and this kind of dematerialization of the way we more commonly encounter art on a daily basis. You're seeing it in reproduction, you're seeing it online, you're seeing it on the museum's website, likely before, and maybe only if, that's your encounter with it. And so, this process of kind of better understanding and constantly learning about the craft of making, every work of art, I mean, granted, this is probably a general statement, but obviously every work of art is a work of craft, but, all of these folks are finding new ways to engage and rethink both whether it's traditions of painting or sculpture, and finding new avenues and materials, and understanding sort of how those materials are sourced, or what's the significance behind those materials in general, and kind of engaging that.
It makes me think of, I was curious to ask your thoughts on the legacy of medium in this particular context in Maine, because I think the quickest association is painting, a very strong 19th century modernist American painting tradition, but of course also ceramics, and of course through places like Maine Media Workshop, there is a strong photo kind of legacy. But I'm curious to know, if there have been any surprises in medium, or anything, any kind of reflections on medium, and the way the medium operates.
I know. I
the
think
contemporary scene here.
It's again, it comes to, you know, the way in which, again, approaches are sort of inflected by communities in Maine, you know, I think, or whether the materials that artists are physically encountering or engaging, you know, whether it's you know, from the coast or into the woods, or just conversations in kilns, and whatever materials are getting their hands on. You know, I do think it's important to constantly remind ourselves that, you know, Maine is not just a state of painting. You know, Marston Hartley's legacy continues long as a painter of Maine, and that Maine is only a place for painters, but that has never been the case, and, you know, won't continue to be the case ever. So.
And not to say that.
No, painting's fine. I love painting. I mean, I love painting. You guys are, we're good.
It's really fascinating to me. And I did want to talk also, I was thinking about preponderance of certain materials. I did want to talk a little bit about, we talked about the queer legacy. Maine is statistically the whitest state in America, I believe, and so I'm curious to hear your thoughts about kind of underrepresented populations, artists who would otherwise be underrepresented in museum collections, in shows, and what that kind of, you know, the place is, what's the place of kind of racialization, sexuality, gender, what should we be doing as curators? I'm curious to know your thoughts.
I mean, I think, you know, I will say, just from a macro level, it feels like it's a wonderful time. It is because it is a wonderful time being a curator in the state of Maine. I consider uniquely sort of this constellation of arts institutions in the state, and at least the curatorial staff working at them, you know, are one of a kind and fantastic. I think that we converse constantly, we look to each other, we look to national stories. I think that there is, again, you know, something that comes out of the pandemic is, you know, for better or for worse, and I hope for better, you know, institutions are reevaluating, you know, themselves, ourselves, of the types of narratives we're doing. I think it is a constant, you know, skepticism towards what, you know, historical narratives and traditions have been, who has access to those narratives, who has access to the spaces, and how we kind of improve and continue to look critically upon the legacy in which we are shepherding. And that comes from, again, dialogue, conversations, being more open, and wanting to tell, because again, it comes back to this story. Maine's story is not a singular narrative. It is a complex fabric of, you know, all of these, in our case, artists, but the communities that they build around them, the institutions and historical events that affect them, and trying to build in this more enriching and beautiful story that is our region.
I think of so many institutions that are also, you know, leading the charge. I look at Indigo Arts Alliance and the work that they've been doing to support artist voices of color here in Portland and beyond in Maine, and that made me think about, you know, Mark was mentioning that we have such a kind of unmatched number of residency programs in this. That was a big learning thing for me. Like, wow, feels like every town has a residency program here, which is fantastic. Places to ideate, places to kind of go to remove yourself briefly. from it all to kind of think. What has your relationship been with kind of residency programs and interfacing with them here in Maine as part of your job?
Yeah,
You can talk about
I mean, we're really lucky that we have Surf Point, an artist residency in York that's nearby that we partner with. And it's, it's one of these things that it creates, all of these residencies are these kind of incubators for new dialogues and conversations to occur. Whether or not they're the residencies that are providing support and space for artists living in the area, or they're residencies that are bringing artists from across the country or the globe. Both generate these wonderful possibilities of conversation, of new looking opportunities, of kind of reframing, reanalyzing, rediscussing, and self-reflection that comes out of that, that's critical. And then just kind of points of conversation and generation that comes out of it. You mentioned Indigo, and their kind of mentorship program is incredible. And then the way that all of these artists just come into the area, and Maine is not, if you look at my odometer, it says it is, but Maine is not a big state in terms of the arts community. So people interact, and people share ideas, and people create new friendships that then kind of change and affect their work.
Yeah. I first met both Brian and Holden, who were both on the show, at Hune Oaks, and Brian was working there as the summer residency manager. Holden was there as a resident. But what a place where these moments where these people come together, sharing ideas, and kind of reflect in each other's practice. It's so wonderful. And yeah, I've seen a kind of toggling. Sometimes there'll be at any one time in a residency program, there'll be some folks from closer, as well as people brought from across the world. And so that just allows for a much broader conversation to take place continuously here. Although I do say the residency programs do tend to be seasonal here. A lot of them are, summer tends to be a time when people flock here. But what a wonderful kind of ebullient time to kind of exchange ideas. Yeah. And beyond just residency programs, where there's such an incredible infrastructure of partner museums and institutions here that are working that have been, wonderful to be in conversation with around these themes. Trying to think, what else did we have that we wanted to talk about? We're close to time, but I was wondering if you had any other questions or thoughts?
Well, first of all, we'll say congratulations on the show upstairs, because it is really wonderful, and I won't make or ask that the artists in the show stand up and introduce yourselves, but it warrants a round of applause, because it really is wonderful, both seeing faces that I've known and their work, and meeting folks who I didn't know, and seeing their work on view. The scope and scale, and again, the way that the exhibition is kind of organized thematically, and thinking through the dialogues that come out of these themes. I don't know if this is how you kind of think through things, but I love seeing works of art that you otherwise wouldn't see together enter into a conversation. I just think of kind of right off the top, the turn into seeing Brian and James's work together. You're just like, oh man, yes, this is great. And how was that process, kind of thinking through those conversations as you were going through?
So I oftentimes let the artists lead, and so I think we're so often quick to shy away. I think I can say Brian and James are besties. They're great friends, and I think there's a natural exchange of ideas that occur when you are both artists, you're both trained together, James in painting, Brian in sculpture, but they're obviously talking, and I think even if it's not immediately apparent in the work, if you were to see it one-off, you start to look a little deeper and you see those synergies. And so I always like to ask artists who they're looking at. Who are you looking at? Who do you see yourself in dialogue with? And that will oftentimes lead that staging of that conversation within the physical space of the gallery, because there's obviously a good nugget there that they're sharing. And so I always try to let the artist tell me what they're thinking about, and lead with kind of their ideation process too. It's really amazing to see people working in different media. And again, the scene is really small here. There are lots of wonderful friendships that I think are represented in this show. And it's photographers who are friends with ceramicists who are friends with people working in fiber working. And so if you don't immediately see the correlation in medium, you start to see it in other ways. I like to think about how, it's not in the show, but there's a photograph that Dylan took of Tessa's hand once. Like, you guys are using each other as subjects sometimes, which I think is so beautiful. That to me is really poignant. It shows how kind of embedded you all are in each other's kind of worlds and lives, and how openly you're sharing ideas. Again, coming back to that first point where people are so willing here to share. There's not that sense of competition or holding your cards close. And everyone acting as a community advocate beyond their role as simply being artists, really looking out for one another. So showing that somewhat, hopefully, in that exhibition, that those affective ties really do hold people together. I'm curious to know what projects you're excited about for yourself, and what's next for you at Ogunquit, and what do you think's next for contemporary art in Maine? What are you looking at? What are you looking towards?
Oh God, we'll have a fun year next year. Yeah. Next year's gonna be fun.
About it.
Or terrible, but
I think fun.
I'm hoping fun
here this year. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
who saw the Anthony Kadehi show that Devon opened this spring. Absolutely amazing museum debut for Anthony's work. What a thoughtful and gorgeous hang, and it's incredible to see Anthony, a global star, have his first show in Maine. What an incredible moment that was for all of us, and a lot of the As We Are artists and I went to see that opening together, and what a fun opening. So congratulations on that. It was such an incredible moment to have that come to us. We didn't have to go anywhere to see Anthony. You brought Anthony to us, so thank you.
Oh, yeah. I'm hoping that we'll have more fun openings at the very least, if nothing else. And what am I looking for? I don't look for any. I mean, and this is kind of the wonderful thing is, like, as you said, it's the conversations that you have that then draw you to, because this might come as, I don't know, maybe I'm speaking out of turn, this might come as a surprise, but the artists are at the forefront of all of this. We kind of follow and are bestowed with this kind of wonderful gift to be able to work with them and work through them, but it's so often, have you been to or seen this, and that doesn't come from me, it's coming from everyone around, so.
Well, I think it's a great moment to share that As We Are stays open through April 27th, 2025, and in the time between now and then, every single artist in the show is going to come back to do a public program, so please do pick up a rack card upstairs with all those dates, some really exciting in-gallery talks, in-gallery conversations. I'm particularly looking forward to instances in which two artists from the show will be leading walkthroughs of the exhibitions. I always love hearing artists talk about each other's work. And so I think some of the things that I've mentioned today about how interconnected this community is will become even more apparent when you see these artists talking about each other's works in the gallery. There'll also be a couple of panel discussions that are going to be thinking through the question of medium more specifically. So please do come back, and it'll be a great moment to get to know the artists themselves. I can say, because I know all 14 of them are so fun, and it's incredible to learn from and hear from. So I'm looking forward to it myself. Yeah.
Yeah, don't miss out.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Devon, for being here with me today. This was so much fun. Thank you all for being here. And please go enjoy the show.